Welcome back. Now that you are officially a SQL query writer, we can start building on your skills by adding more finesse to your queries. We already saw the select and from clauses, which are sections every query will need. Today we'll talk about the where clause, which is not required but often very helpful. After today's lesson, you will know how to add a where section into your query and why you would want to. You'll also understand how to use the equal to and not equal to operators in your where section. So what is the where clause, what does it do, and where does it go in the SQL statement? It will go after both the select and from sections in the query. And the reason you would add an additional clause to your SQL statement is that the where clause lets you filter out rows that may not be helpful to you. So here we have a SQL query skeleton when you have a where clause. First, the select section, next the from section, lastly the where section. So in the where section, you will be putting in these things called conditions that say bring back values in the columns that meet a specified criteria. So if you recall, the select section will tell the database which fields to return from the database. But the database also needs to know which tables to go to locate the fields in the select section. That's where the from section comes into play. It tells the database which tables to look in for the columns that you're asking for. So this is the type of query we have seen so far. Select first name, last name from subjects. And this would be what the result set from the query would look like. We have first name and last name from the subjects table. So now let's talk about what the where section would do. It would tell the database to only bring back data if it met certain conditions. For instance, rather than bringing back first and last names for all subjects, a condition could be added in the where section to say only bring back first and last names of female subjects. Let's take a closer look at how we would only bring back the first and last name of female subjects. So after the select section and from section, we would have the word where, then we would have a condition. In this case, our condition is saying only bring back rows of data in the select statement if the value in the column specified equals a specific value. The condition we have is where column equals X. The equal sign in the condition is something called an operator. It is a symbol you can use in your where section. There are several operators we will introduce in the next few lessons. They will help you get better control over the results you return from your query. So today we will introduce two operators, the first one being the equal sign. So we want to only bring back the first and last name of female subjects. Let's look at the subject table and see if we can identify what column will help us do that. If you'll notice, there is a column that will tell the gender of the subject. So that sounds pretty promising, right? Since we only want females, we could add a condition in our where section that said where gender equals female. Now let's take a look at how that would look in the query. So we have our select and we added gender to the columns we are bringing back, and our from clause telling the database to get the rows of data from the subject table, and then we say where gender equals female. One thing I want to note before we go on is that we have our single quotes around female because the column gender stores text values. Anytime we have a column that is stored as text or date and we are comparing it to a specific value, the database is expecting single quotes around the value. So we have single quotes in this example around the word female. If the column in our where clause is a number, we would not put single quotes around it. So if we had a column of subject ID, which is stored in the database as a number, and we only wanted to see the data for subject with a subject ID of 10, we would not put single quotes around the 10. If we submitted our query, we would only return values where the gender of the subject row was entered as female. You can see that we are no longer returning Xavier and Philip, but we are still returning Wendy, May, and Mirabelle. Now we are also returning a few other females, Giselle and Susie. Let's take a look at an example to see how the where section can be super helpful to add in our queries. So remember in that last lesson, Cinderella gave Charlie the calligrapher the list of subjects to invite based on selecting all subject first and last names and addresses from the subject table. And Charlie the calligrapher made beautiful invitations that were mailed out. And all was well, at least for a few days. Well, a few days were up and Cinderella had some concerns. It was time for subjects to RSVP, and she was missing a ton of RSVPs. Cinderella was also getting a ton of unopened invitations returned to the kingdom with a huge return to sender stamp on them. Something was up. They had clearly messed up somewhere in their guest list, and Cinderella wanted to get to the bottom of it. Let's take a look at the subjects table and try to identify what was missing from the query that caused so many invitations to be sent out to subjects who were not RSVPing. Do you see the column named active subject? This flag is used to tell if the subject still lives in the kingdom. If it is yes, then the subject lives in the kingdom and should be RSVPing for parties. If it is set to no, then the subject is no longer an active subject. They likely moved to another kingdom and would no longer be living at the address on their row of data. Cinderella confirmed that the missing RSVPs and return to sender invitations looked like they were sent to subjects that were no longer active subjects. So a new guest list would be needed for future parties. And it could look something like this. In the where section, we are saying only bring back subjects where the active flag equals yes. In other words, only bring back addresses and names for active subjects. Remember, active subject is a text field, so we have single quotes around the word yes. Our result set would look something like this, only bringing back subjects that were active. You will see that in SQL, although you'll have to follow the basic rules, there are oftentimes many different ways to write a query to get back the same result set. So we saw the equal operator, but there is another operator that means not equal to, and it looks like this. Two carrots pointed in opposite directions that make the shape of a diamond. We could write a query using the not equal to operator and get the same results as this query using the equal sign to only return active subjects. Take a moment and see if you can write this query with the not equal to sign. Okay, so instead of saying active subject equals yes, we could say active subject is not equal to no, which is basically saying the same thing. So this operator is just another tool in your toolkit. The result set would look exactly the same either way you wrote this query. So now we know how a where section is helpful in our queries and how to add a where section and use the equal to and not equal to operators. Now it's time for another activity, and then come on back for the next lesson where we learn how to do even more cool stuff with the where section.